Guys, hide your JPEGs. The Mafia is here. Jpegmafia is a bit of a torchbearer for those of us that Kanye West and Death Grips left behind. He's curated a specific sound and style where he sort of samples only the craziest things you can find on the internet. His production is chaotic, harsh, and unpredictable, but never quite loses focus of the underlying sounds in his palette. He'll bend and twist them in crazier and crazier ways, throwing in all sorts of curveballs, but well, generally pretty cohesive if a tad bit unlistenable. He's got some of the most aggressive lyrics in hip-hop. While not necessarily leaning towards posturing about like money and hoes, his lyrics are uniquely critical. He pulls from internet culture heavily, which for the chronically online sits right at home, being able to understand every twisted meme and internet saying. But while he lives this perpetual virtual machine, he seems to both violently hate the culture around him while simultaneously unable to pull himself away from it. He hates how acutely aware he is of everything around him. He'll oftentimes criticize the very demographics that make up his fan base. The Jpegmafia sound hit its peak with LP, an album which focused his sound in on the essentials while also elevating it to new heights. But to me, it never really came across as one cohesive package. He sort of seemed unable to become more than the sum of his own parts. And after last year's collab album with Danny Brown, an album which honestly to me failed to live up to the expectations I had, mostly due to some horrendous mixing choices, Peggy comes to us now with I Lay Down My Life For You. Right off the bat, we're hit with what you would expect from a Jpegmafia project. He has a line about Dylan Brooks, a witty, somewhat self-deprecating, but hilariously self-aware line, followed by some speaker-tearing music. Immediately though, what's apparent is the use of live drumming, a decision that permeates the entirety of this album, along with a lot of guitar. And on the next song, Sin Miedo, it becomes evident that these instruments are here to stay, which is a good thing because on Sin Miedo, there is an absolutely gnarly guitar solo. It's amazing how well this instrumentation choice works into the Jpegmafia sound as a whole, which he's historically leaned on mostly electronic digital sounds and sampling. I Lay Down My Life For You, at least for the first half, sounds more like a thrash metal album than a hip-hop album. There's also elements of some sort of dark dance music, with the beats oftentimes getting trance-like qualities, like on It's Dark and Hell Is Hot. After that, we have the first feature on the album, Vince Staples, who absolutely does his thing on this. I like the choice here because Staples is pretty laid back, almost disinterested at times, which makes the delivery sound something like right off of Big Fish Theory, which already has some of the same sounds as this LP. The next couple of songs continue this trend of dark, sludgy production, with the guitar rearing its head again. But now there's an added element of an orchestral nature where, especially towards the latter half of the album, Peggy merges this dark and industrial sound with the cinematic. These tracks feel like they're building up to something. They're great on their own, but they're like scaffolding for something great. And that greatness shows up on Exmilitary, an ode to Death Grips' mixtape by the same name. Exmilitary is the longest track on the album and acts as the emotional core of the LP. And things here are clearly transitioning to a rare, surprisingly more earnest Jpegmafia, who oftentimes hides behind his aggressive and angsty nature. After a quick breather with Jihad Joe, we continue this climax with the JPEG Ultra, with production I can only describe as evil jazz. There's a distinct bizarro edge to everything, but it's also beautifully crafted jazzy instrumentals, and Jpegmafia is at his most coherent here. The rest of the album after this sort of then pulls back and becomes much more glittery, earnest, lush, and cinematic, adjectives that I cannot believe I'm using to describe a Jpegmafia album. But while these songs show a clear vibe switch and growth for Peggy as a producer, it brings us to the most glaring issue on the album. Jpegmafia cannot drop the edgelord act. The internet memery and violent aggression work when the production matches that same energy, but this LP is one of Peggy's least eclectic sounds, and his lyricism and rapping need to match that or contrast smartly against this new direction. And oftentimes it gets a little off-putting listen to Jpegmafia buzz like a mosquito in your ear with lines like, she acting like a thought, hope it's an act cause she deserves a Tony, accompanied by violin quartets and soft drumming. Another huge issue here that rears its head is the mixing. The mixing on his music has always been awful. It honestly made Scaring the Hose borderline unlistenable for me, but it once again massively detracts from the album, and it ruins his vocals on, I would say, more than half of the songs. All that being said, this is probably the most listenable Jpegmafia has ever been, While some will be disappointed by the departure from the chaotic genre blender sound of the past, I like this direction way more. His songwriting is like more focused, his sound is more refined, and his creativity as an artist has matured immensely on this album. There's a clear creative vision here without sacrificing that very vintage Jpegmafia bite. I absolutely love this album, and he was at the risk of becoming a bit one note with a lot of his music, but I think given more time and effort in this direction and him pushing this sound further with these more focused live instrumentation and orchestral sounds, it's actually gotten me more excited about Jpegmafia than I have in the past. I've always kind of liked his music, but it's never really hit for me. It's always been sort of like a little too much, a little more than a handful to digest at times. But I will say this new direction, again, has really gotten me excited to know what Jpegmafia is going to put out in the future. This is definitely one of my favorite albums of the year so far. I do absolutely love this thing so far. I've listened to it probably 3 or 4 times. It also comes in a very lean 41 minutes, which to me is really important for an album. I don't like albums that are overly long without justifying that length. And I think for the sound and the direction that Jpegmafia is going in, 41 minutes is just perfect. It's the perfect length, and I do really like this album. Feeling like an 8.5 on this. So yeah, Jpegmafia, I lay down my life for you.